The freshly printed, still warm liability waiver was thrown right at my face. Its sharp paper edge grazed my cheek before fluttering down to the foam mats. "Sign it, you pathetic loser," Amy, my own flesh and blood sister, hissed. Her heavily made-up face was twisted with envy and malicious triumph. "Sign it, and let's see how that arrogant attitude of yours saves you from getting your teeth knocked out. Or are you just gonna grab your soft fatherless kid and waddle back to your trashy little hole?" 3 steps away on the mat, my 12-year-old son Leo was curled into a ball. He clutched his ribs, gasping and sobbing for air. Standing over him was Marcus, my megalomaniac brother-in-law, a former regional MMA champ. He smirked, slapping his taped fists together. "Get up, little punk, or do you want to hide behind your useless mother's skirt?" I didn't cry. I didn't step back. The cold air from the AC blew open my baggy cardigan, grazing the bullet scar tearing across my ribs underneath. My sister and her husband had no idea. They had just forced a former Tier 1 operator to sign a legal liability waiver. And they had just personally stripped away their own final chance of walking out of here intact. I slowly took off my wire-rimmed glasses, locked my dead eyes on the Adam's apple of this 200-pound man, and calculated the exact math: 102 seconds. Before I show you exactly how brutally those 102 seconds ended, pause for a moment. Take a second to like and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. Let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? I want to know how many of you are staying up with me to face the ruthless wounds left by family. And now let's rewind the clock to just a few weeks ago so you can understand exactly why. My son and I were pushed into this corner by our own blood. The heavy oak door swung open, dragging against the floorboards with a dull scrape. Leo stepped into the dining room. His small shoulders hunched forward. The left strap of his faded blue backpack hung by a single frayed thread. But it was his face that made the room go quiet. A deep, ugly purple bruise stretched from his left cheekbone down to his jawline. The blood had pooled underneath the skin, swollen and tender. He kept his eyes glued to his scuffed sneakers. I sat at the far corner of the long marble table, freezing. The cheap, itchy fabric of my oversized sweater smelled heavily of discount laundry detergent. It was a sharp, pathetic contrast to the rich scent of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and charred ribeye filling the dining room. Amy didn't even flinch. She sat at the head of the table, crossing her legs. Her silk blouse caught the dim amber light of the chandelier. She tapped her red acrylic nails against the marble. Tap, tap, tap. "Look at this," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "This is exactly what happens when a boy doesn't have a father in the house. He turns into a walking punching bag for every piece of public school trash out there." She didn't ask who hit him. She didn't get a bag of ice. She just used my 12-year-old son's bleeding face as a convenient prop to remind me of my failure. Across from her, Marcus sawed into a thick piece of steak. Blood smeared across his white porcelain plate. He chewed loudly, the muscles in his thick neck bulging. He pointed his sharp silver fork straight at my chest. "Public school ain't gonna save soft kids, Amelia," he grunted, swallowing the meat whole. "You're raising a weakling. Out in the real world, wolves eat sheep. And your boy, he's looking real appetizing." He wiped the grease from his chin with a linen napkin. "Bring him to my gym next Tuesday. Vance Elite, I'll put him on the mats. Beat the pathetic out of him, turn him into a wolf, family discount." It wasn't an offer, it was a command. A command wrapped in the sickening, hypocritical illusion of family support. I looked down at my plate. Cold, leftover mashed potatoes. A dry piece of bread. Underneath the loose sleeves of my sweater, the tendons in my forearms coiled tight like steel wire. My breathing dropped. Inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. My eyes shifted from the silver fork in Marcus's meaty hand to the soft, exposed skin right above his collarbone. 18 inches away. My chair was positioned perfectly. The heavy steak knife rested 2 inches from my right pinky finger. One fluid motion. I could drive the blade upward, sever the artery, and end his arrogant breathing before his heavy body even hit the oak floor. I had eaten dry rations in dirt holes for years, mailing every dime of my overseas pay back home so Amy could afford her shiny marketing degree and her sorority dues. Now I sat here occupying a chipped chair, eating their cold scraps, listening to them humiliate my child. My fingers twitched toward the knife. Then I felt a slight tug on my sleeve. Leo. He was standing right beside my chair. His small bruised face was pale. He was trembling, shrinking away from the adults at the table. From his own aunt and uncle, he was terrified. The cold, violent calculation in my head shattered. The grip on my own sanity tightened. I let go of a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I aligned the edges of my paper napkin, creasing it into a perfect, rigid square. I placed it over my untouched food, pressing it flat. I looked up. The chandelier light burned into my retinas. Tuesday, I said. My voice was completely hollow. Dead. Amy smirked, lifting her crystal wine glass. Marcus let out a loud guttural laugh and went back to sawing his bloody meat. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully forced the poor, helpless single mother into submission. I pulled Leo closer to my side, feeling his fragile ribs under his thin cotton shirt. I had just agreed to hand my only son over to a monster. Tuesday at Vance Elite. I would be there. I pushed the heavy glass door open. A blast of over-air-conditioned air hit my face, drying the sweat on my neck. The gym smelled like burnt rubber mats, cheap floor cleaner, and stale body odor. Blue neon lights buzzed near the ceiling, glaring off the long wall of mirrors. Thwack, thwack. Heavy leather gloves pounded against thick canvas bags in the corner. I stood completely still by the entrance for 3 seconds. My eyes tracked left, then right. 24 people in the room. 2 fire exits behind the front desk. 3 security cameras, one with a clear blind spot near the water fountain. A cold, hardwired habit I couldn't turn off. Leo squeezed his eyes shut at the sudden noise. His small, clammy fingers dug into the cheap, itchy fabric of my worn cardigan. He dragged his scuffed sneakers across the vinyl floor, trying to hide behind my shadow. Amy was already waiting in the bleacher section. She wore a matching designer athleisure set, spotless white sneakers that had never touched dirt, and a heavy layer of floral perfume that choked the stale air around her. Clinging to her arm was Eleanor Hughes, the PTA president, holding a massive iced coffee. Amy patted a plush padded leather VIP chair for Eleanor. Then, without even making eye contact with me, she kicked a hard plastic folding chair toward my shins. It scraped loudly against the floor. "Sit there," Amy muttered. Then she turned back to Eleanor. Her voice suddenly went up an octave. It was loud, coated in fake sweetness, designed for every suburban mom in earshot to hear. "I just had to bring them in, Eleanor. You know how it is. Being a single mom is so rough on her. She can barely keep the lights on. No money, no male figure for the boy. Marcus and I just want to step up and give them a taste of a real, functioning family structure." Eleanor nodded sympathetically, her manicured fingers tapping her plastic cup. She looked down at my faded store-bought jeans and the dark circles under my eyes like I was a stray dog they were feeding out of pity. Just a prop for Amy's social climbing. I sat on the cold plastic chair. I didn't speak. I crossed my arms, tucking my rough, calloused hands out of sight. Out on the blue foam mats, Marcus was putting on a show. He was shirtless, his thick back covered in faded tribal tattoos. He grunted loudly, slamming heavy kicking pads onto the floor. The line of little kids flinched, pulling their shoulders to their ears. He wasn't teaching them form or discipline. He was selling fear. He strutted back and forth, puffing out his chest, playing the alpha male for the row of bored mothers scrolling on their phones in the bleachers. He thrived on it. The absolute power over people smaller and weaker than him. I kept my eyes locked on his movements. He threw a heavy shadow punch at the air. His weight shifted entirely wrong. His back heel lifted too high off the mat, leaving his base completely off balance. He breathed from his upper chest, not his diaphragm, his mouth hanging slightly open. He was burning oxygen too fast. He was sloppy. Just an amateur wearing a tough disguise, hiding behind brute force. If you've ever had to sit in dead silence while a toxic family member humiliated you just to make themselves look good to strangers, I need you to do something right now. Like this video, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what is the exact word they always use to make you feel worthless? For me, it was charity. Let me know yours. We are not alone in this fight. Down on the mat, Marcus paced down the line of trembling kids. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't look at the older boys. He didn't look at the confident ones. He turned his thick neck, raised a hand wrapped in dirty white athletic tape, and pointed his finger straight at the second row. Right at Leo. You! Marcus barked, his rough voice echoing off the concrete walls. Get out here! The soles of Leo's bare feet squeaked against the blue foam mat. He was panting, his thin chest heaving under a sweat-soaked, faded cotton shirt. The harsh neon lights beat down on him. Down! Marcus barked, his voice echoing over the heavy bass of the gym's stereo. Up, get up, you lazy piece of trash. Leo's arms finally gave out. He collapsed, his knobby knees slamming hard into the floor. He stayed there gasping, staring blindly at a puddle of his own sweat. Marcus didn't offer a hand. He stepped closer, towering over the 12-year-old boy. His heavy shadow swallowed Leo completely. Look at this, Marcus sneered, looking up at the bleachers. He gestured to Leo like a piece of garbage left on the curb. This is what happens when a mother raises a boy. You get a weak, pathetic little street mouse, a victim. Up in the bleachers, Amy let out a sharp, high-pitched giggle. She crossed her legs, smoothing out her designer leggings. She shook her iced coffee, the cubes clattering loudly against the plastic cup. She leaned over to Eleanor. It's sad, really, Amy whispered, making sure her voice carried. Kids today are just so incredibly fragile. No backbone at all. Thank God Marcus is willing to fix him. I sat perfectly still on my cold folding chair. My right hand was wrapped around a cheap plastic water bottle. Crack! The thin plastic caved in under my grip. The bottle deformed entirely. Lukewarm water pushed up through the cap, spilling over my rough knuckles and dripping down onto the dirty vinyl floor in a steady rhythm. I didn't blink. I didn't wipe my hand. I forced my breathing to slow down, focusing on a scuff mark on the wall. I locked my jaw so tight the hinges throbbed. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. I forced my heart rate to drop back to 60 beats a minute. I had walked away from the violence. I had packed away the worst parts of my past just to be a normal mother. I just wanted my son to have a family, even a broken one. I just had to swallow the pride. 4, 5, 6. Keep it together. Keep the animal locked in the cage. Down on the mat, Marcus wasn't done playing. He reached down and grabbed the collar of Leo's shirt in one massive taped fist. He yanked upward. Leo scrambled to his feet, choking slightly as the cheap fabric dug deep into his throat. Stand up straight. Marcus grunted, yanking him again. I'm gonna show these kids how to handle a real physical threat. Be my dummy. Marcus didn't hold back. He threw a heavy feigned elbow right at Leo's face, stopping just an inch from his nose. Leo flinched violently, raising his small arms over his head to protect himself. Wrong! Marcus yelled, slapping Leo's arms down hard. You cover up like a coward, you get beat like a coward. He shoved Leo roughly by the shoulder. Leo stumbled backward, his bare feet tangling. His wide, terrified eyes darted frantically up to the bleachers. He was looking for me. He was silently begging for his mother. I loosened my grip on the crushed water bottle. The plastic popped back out with a sharp click. Marcus saw Leo looking away. His ego flared up. He couldn't stand losing the boy's complete fearful attention. He demanded absolute, unquestioning submission in his own gym. He didn't give a warning. He didn't tell Leo to brace himself. Marcus stepped in, dropping his hips low. He swung his thick right leg, throwing all 200 pounds of his adult body weight into a full-force sweep. The back of his heavy calf slammed into both of Leo's thin ankles. Leo's feet were violently ripped out from under him. The 12-year-old boy went completely airborne, his arms flailing uselessly. Time seemed to stop. The heavy bass of the stereo faded out. Smack. The sickening dry sound of Leo's entire left ribcage slamming into the dense foam mat echoed sharply off the concrete walls. His small body bounced once before crumpling. The sheer force of the impact drove every single ounce of air violently out of his lungs in a wet, choked gasp. The cheap plastic pen clicked twice before I tossed it onto the particle board desk. I slid the freshly signed liability waiver across the counter. Chloe, the young receptionist in a tight gym tank top, stared at the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't even pick it up. Out on the blue foam mats, Marcus stood waiting. He slammed his taped fists together, the heavy thud cutting through the gym. He pointed to a pile of thick, sweaty headgear near the water cooler. "Suit up, Amelia." He grinned, bouncing lightly on his toes. "I don't want you crying to Amy about a broken nose." I didn't answer. I didn't look at the headgear. I crouched down. My fingers moved mechanically, loosening the frayed laces of my cheap sneakers. I slipped them off, picking them up by the heels. I walked over to the edge of the mat and set them down. I nudged the right shoe with my toe until it was perfectly flush with the left, exactly parallel to the baseboard. Absolute rigid order in a room full of chaos. I stood back up. I grabbed the bottom hem of my itchy, oversized cardigan. With one smooth pull, I dragged it over my head and let it drop onto the floor. The blast of cold air from the ceiling vents hit my bare skin. Up in the bleachers, the murmurs stopped. The sharp, obnoxious giggle died in Amy's throat. Eleanor Hughes, sitting next to her, brought a manicured hand up to her mouth and sucked in a sharp, audible breath. A complete, dead silence sucked the oxygen out of the room. Underneath the heavy sweater, I wasn't wearing a faded t-shirt. I was wearing a black sports bra. And there wasn't an ounce of soft, forgiving flesh on my frame. My arms were roped with dense, hard muscle. But that wasn't what silenced the room. It was the map of violence carved into my skin. A thick, jagged scar tore across my left rib cage, deep, ugly, and purple, left by flying shrapnel years ago. A perfectly round white burn mark sat dead center on my right shoulder blade, and stretching across my collarbone, stark against my pale skin, was a faded, black ink tattoo. 3 letters, 3 numbers. A permanent brand from a life they knew nothing about. Amy stared down at me. The smug, condescending sneer was completely wiped from her heavily powdered face. For her entire life, she had used my baggy clothes and quiet demeanor to paint me as a pathetic, broken charity case. She used me to make herself look taller. Now, looking at the brutal, undeniable proof of what I had actually survived to put her through college, her jaw just hung open. I cracked my neck. The vertebrae popped loudly in the quiet room. Pop, pop. I turned my head and looked at Marcus. He had stopped bouncing on his toes. His taped hands lowered slightly. I watched the heavy Adam's apple bob up and down in his thick throat. He swallowed hard. The arrogant spark in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden creeping hesitation. I didn't do a warm-up. I didn't stretch. I stepped onto the blue foam mat. My bare feet made no sound. I walked in a perfectly straight line, closing the distance until I was exactly 1 arm's length away from his chest. I didn't raise my hands to protect my face. I didn't drop into a fighting stance. I let both of my arms hang completely loose, dead at my sides. An open, defenseless target. I didn't look at his fists. I locked my eyes dead center on his sternum, staring straight through the tribal ink on his chest. The clock in my head started ticking. 102 seconds. Marcus felt the dead silence of the room pressing against his neck. The absolute shock on Amy's face stung his ego. He was the alpha here, the king of his own dirty, sweat-stained castle. He couldn't stand looking weak in front of his wife and the suburban moms in the bleachers. He let out a loud, guttural roar, a cheap intimidation tactic. He closed the gap instantly. He threw a fast combination of jabs to blind my vision. Then he planted his left foot and swung his thick right leg. A full-power sweeping leg kick aimed directly at my front thigh. The exact same cowardly brute force move he used to break my 12-year-old son's ribs. He wanted to drop me in the first second to save his fragile pride. I didn't blink. I didn't step back. When the heavy leather gloves flew at my face, I simply tilted my head. Exactly 1 inch. The rough leather grazed the very tip of my ear. When his thick legs swung like a baseball bat toward my thigh, I just casually lifted my knee. I didn't tense my muscles. I didn't brace for impact. I just slightly rotated my leg outward, exposing the absolute hardest, densest part of my shin bone to meet the soft flesh and muscle of his calf. Crack. The sound of bone violently hitting bone echoed through the gym like a snapping tree branch. Marcus shrieked, a high, thin sound he couldn't control. He yanked his leg back instantly. He stumbled backward, dragging his right foot. He was limping badly. The acrid, sour smell of the gym suddenly changed. The sharp, metallic scent of sheer panic began to pour out of his pores. The illusion of his power was gone. Fear swallowed him whole. His brain short-circuited. Desperate and humiliated, he abandoned every ounce of his gym training. He threw a wild, heavy left hook. A sloppy, looping punch with all his weight behind it. I didn't dodge. I opened my right hand. I caught the punch directly in my palm. My 5 calloused fingers clamped down over the thick padding of his glove. My grip locked like a hydraulic vise. All 200 pounds of his forward momentum hit a dead wall. I froze him entirely in place. If you've ever watched a toxic, arrogant bully suddenly realize they picked the wrong person to mess with, I want you to hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what was the exact look on their face when they realized they were done? For Marcus, it was pure terror. Let me know your story down below. I didn't let go of his fist. I pulled his arm forward, yanking his heavy body completely off balance. I pulled him so close I could feel his ragged, desperate breath on my cheek. I leaned in, my voice dead and quiet. "Breathing from your chest," I whispered. "Ribs wide open. You were dead at second 2. I twisted my hips and shoved. The raw kinetic energy traveled up through my core and out through my open palm. Marcus's 200-pound frame flew backward. His bare feet screeched wildly against the sweaty vinyl mat as he scrambled for balance. Panic completely overrode his brain. The desperate muscle memory instinct of a cornered gym bro kicked in. He didn't reset his stance. He tucked his chin, dropped his heavy shoulders, and dove headfirst straight toward my thighs, trying to wrap his thick arms around my legs for a brutal full-force takedown. I didn't take a single step backward. The moment he dropped his head, I kicked both of my legs straight back into the air and snapped my hips down toward the floor. I dropped the entire dead weight of my body straight down onto his upper back like a falling cinder block. Thud. Marcus's face slammed directly into the dense foam mat. The sudden crushing weight on the back of his neck and shoulder blades drove every single cubic inch of oxygen out of his lungs. He let out a wet, desperate wheeze. He was trapped underneath me, splayed out flat on his stomach. He grunted violently, trying to buck his hips upward to shake me off. It was completely useless. My weight was distributed perfectly, bearing his center of gravity into the floor. He wasn't fighting a person anymore. He was fighting physics. Up in the bleachers, the dead silence was suffocating. The thumping bass from the gym speakers seemed to fade out entirely. Amy was standing up now. Her knuckles were bone white as she gripped the cold metal railing of the viewing section. Her mouth hung open. She couldn't scream. She couldn't process what she was watching. The big, aggressive alpha male she used as a shield to bully the rest of our family was currently pinned face down to a dirty mat, squirming like a crushed bug. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't need to. I just slid my right elbow forward, pressing the hard point of the bone directly into the soft notch at the base of his skull. I leaned down just enough to hold him entirely paralyzed. I didn't put enough pressure to snap the bone, but enough to send a sharp, terrifying electrical shock down his spine. He stopped thrashing immediately. A low, pathetic whimper vibrated in his throat. While pinning her husband to the floor, I slowly looked up at the bleachers. I locked eyes with Amy. I saw the heavy foundation caking her face. I saw the expensive athletic wear she bought just to sit and drink iced coffee. And I saw the bottomless pit of insecurity she spent her entire life trying to cover up by tearing me down. I didn't say a single word to her. I didn't have to. The absolute emptiness in my eyes burned right through her fake, perfectly curated suburban life. She physically recoiled, stepping back from the railing, her hands shaking. I lifted my elbow off the back of his neck. I stood up smoothly without using my hands and took 3 slow, deliberate steps backward. I left him lying there, humiliated and gasping for air in front of his wife, his clients, and the PTA president. I looked down at the heavy tattooed man trembling on the blue foam. "Get up," I said. The words were flat, devoid of any emotion. It was a quiet invitation, an invitation to let his shattered ego write a check his body couldn't cash. Marcus pushed himself up off the blue foam mat. He was breathing heavily, ragged gulps of air tearing through his throat. His face was flushed a deep, ugly red. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes. The humiliation was absolute. He had just been manhandled, pressed face down into the dirt of his own gym by a woman half his size, in front of his paying clients, in front of the PTA president, in front of his wife, who had spent years convincing everyone that he was the ultimate alpha male. The last thread of his rational thought snapped. He bit down hard on his mouthguard. He planted his back foot, twisting his heavy hips backward to gather every single ounce of kinetic energy left in his 200-pound frame. He threw a massive, overhand right, a Hail Mary punch. A reckless, desperate gamble meant to take my head completely off my shoulders and salvage whatever was left of his shattered ego. To him, it was a blur of pure rage. To me, the entire movement was agonizingly slow. I watched the muscles in his shoulder bunch up before the punch even started. I saw his center axis tilt. I saw his ribcage peel wide open, completely exposing his vital organs. It was a barroom brawler's punch. Loud, telegraphic, full of holes. I didn't step back to avoid the hit. I stepped in. I slid my left foot forward, closing the distance, instantly stepping deep inside the sweeping radius of his heavy arm. The leather glove whipped past the back of my head, hitting nothing but stale, air-conditioned air. My lead foot planted firmly against the vinyl mat. My hips coiled tight and snapped forward with the sudden, violent release of a compressed steel spring. I threw a right hook. My fist traveled less than 8 inches. It wasn't about muscle. It was about pure, undeniable physics. The total weight of my body accelerating over a brutally short distance, driving directly into a pinpoint target. The knuckles of my bare hand connected flush against the hinge of his jaw right below the earlobe. Crack! The sound of the impact snapped through the gym like a gunshot. The sheer force of the 8-inch punch violently whipped Marcus's skull to the side. The sudden extreme rotation slammed his brain against the inside of his skull. The blunt force trauma struck the vagus nerve dead on. His central nervous system shut down the power. Instantly. He didn't stumble. He didn't wave his arms trying to catch his balance. He didn't even groan. Every single muscle in his thick, tattooed body just went completely slack. The lights went out. His 200-pound frame folded at the knees and crashed straight down onto the blue foam mat. He landed hard, face first, hitting the floor with the heavy dead thud of a dropped cement bag. He didn't move. He didn't twitch. He lay there completely unconscious in a pool of his own sweat. The digital clock on the gym wall blinked. Exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds had passed since I took off my glasses. 102 seconds. I had thrown exactly one punch. I stood over his lifeless body. I didn't rub my knuckles. I didn't celebrate. I just slowly turned my head, my breathing completely steady, and locked my dead eyes on the bleachers. On the terrified, trembling woman who shared my last name. The 200-pound body of Marcus Vance lay completely motionless, face down on the blue foam. A piercing, hysterical scream ripped through the heavy silence of the gym. Amy shoved her plastic folding chair backward. It clattered loudly against the concrete floor. She scrambled over the low metal railing, her expensive designer leggings catching on a jagged edge. She hit the floor running, but her designer sneakers slipped wildly on the sweaty vinyl. She stumbled, falling hard onto her knees, and crawled the rest of the way to her husband. "Marcus!" she shrieked, grabbing his thick, limp shoulder, trying frantically to shake him awake. His head just lolled uselessly to the side. "Marcus, get up. Oh my God, look at me." Up in the bleachers, Eleanor Hughes stood completely frozen. The PTA president clutched her $3,000 leather purse tight against her chest, as if it could protect her. The other suburban mothers didn't move an inch. None of them rushed down to help Amy. Instead, the glowing screens of their smartphones remained perfectly steady, recording every pathetic, humiliating second of the Gym King's downfall. The pristine, high-class mask Amy had spent years supergluing to her face was completely stripped away. She wasn't the powerful, wealthy wife of an alpha male anymore. She was just a screaming, desperate woman sitting in a puddle of dirty sweat. I stood there on the mat. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a sudden rush of victory. I just felt an overwhelming, heavy exhaustion. The cold, violent wall of ice in my head began to melt away, leaving behind that dark, familiar emptiness. I hated violence. I hated the smell of adrenaline. I had spent years trying to bury the worst parts of my past under cheap oversized cardigans and quiet submission. I had let them humiliate me, let them belittle my life, just to keep the animal locked in its cage. But my own blood had forced my hand. They had pushed me into a corner and tried to break the only thing I loved. I looked past Amy's sobbing frame to the corner of the gym. Two young assistant trainers were huddled against the wall, their eyes wide with sheer terror. I let my shoulders drop. I didn't yell. My voice was entirely flat, carrying the cold, undeniable weight of absolute authority. "Roll him onto his side so he doesn't swallow his tongue," I ordered the two boys. They flinched but immediately started moving. "It's a minor concussion. He'll wake up in a few minutes. He isn't going to die." I didn't wait for them to respond. There is nothing quite like the heavy, exhausted silence after you finally stand up to a toxic family member. If you've ever had to be the one to break the illusion and expose their fake perfect life to the world, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you realized their perfect family mask was completely fake? For Amy, it was right there on the sweaty mat. Let me know your moment. I turned my back on the crumpled, defeated mess on the floor. My bare feet made a soft, steady rhythm on the foam. I walked slowly, deliberately straight toward the particle board front desk. Sitting right where I had left it was the freshly printed liability waiver. The contract Amy had forced me to sign. I reached out and picked it up. I picked up the heavy, oversized cardigan from the floor. I pulled it over my head, letting the cheap, itchy fabric slide down my arms. It immediately covered the shrapnel scar on my ribs. It hid the burn mark on my shoulder. It swallowed the faded black ink on my collarbone. I was locking the animal back in its cage, rebuilding the quiet, invisible barrier between myself and the rest of the world. I walked over to the edge of the mat, slipped my bare feet into my scuffed sneakers, and tied the laces tight. Then I turned back to the particle board front desk. I picked up the liability waiver. The paper felt crisp and dry between my calloused fingers. The black ink at the bottom of the page clearly showed my signature. The contract Amy had shoved in my face, designed to legally protect her husband while he broke my son for his own entertainment. I walked back toward the center of the gym. Amy was still on the floor, sitting next to Marcus's unconscious body. The thick layer of foundation on her face was streaked with sweat and tears. She looked up at me. There was no mocking smirk anymore. No arrogant, high-pitched comments designed to impress Eleanor Hughes. Her mouth opened, trembling slightly, but no sound came out. The absolute terror in her eyes was raw. She was finally looking at me, not as the pathetic, broke older sister she could use as a punching bag, but as someone who could dismantle her entire life in under 2 minutes without even breaking a sweat. The gap between us wasn't just a few feet of blue foam. It was a bottomless, permanent canyon. I stopped right in front of her. Eleanor and the other PTA mothers in the bleachers held their breath. Their phones still pointed like cheap plastic weapons. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I held the liability waiver up by the top edge right in front of Amy's face. I pinched the top center of the page. Ripe! The dry, abrasive sound of the paper tearing in half cut through the humming noise of the air conditioner. I put the two halves together. I tore them again. Ripe! I kept my eyes locked on Amy's, watching the last remaining shreds of her control over my life disappear. I tore the paper into 8 pieces. Then, 16. I squeezed the torn scraps tightly in my right fist. I opened my hand. The small, jagged white pieces of the contract fluttered down like cheap confetti, landing in the puddle of sweat next to her ruined designer sneakers. She flinched as the paper hit the floor. The contract she forced on me wasn't just about physical liability anymore. It was about family. And I was voiding it. I looked down into the terrified, empty eyes of my own blood. "Your rules mean absolutely nothing here," I said. My voice was colder than the air coming out of the ceiling vents. "From this second forward, do not call my phone, do not show up at my apartment, and if you ever try to get near my son again, you won't be dealing with a sister." I didn't wait to see if she nodded. I didn't care. I turned around and walked over to Leo. He was standing near the bleachers, clutching his bruised ribs, staring at me with wide, completely stunned eyes. I reached out. His small, clammy hand immediately found mine, gripping my rough fingers with a desperate, warm tightness. "Let's go," I whispered. I didn't look back as I pushed the heavy glass door open and walked out. I pushed the heavy glass door open, letting it slam shut behind us. The muggy, suffocating heat of the Texas summer night hit us immediately. It smelled like hot asphalt exhaust fumes and freedom. It completely washed away the stench of stale sweat and burnt rubber from the gym. Leo walked beside me in the parking lot. His small, clammy hand gripped mine so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked up at me. His bruised eyes were still wide, still holding a trace of shock, but right underneath it was a quiet, profound awe. He wasn't looking at a victim anymore. I knelt down on the cracked concrete sidewalk, ignoring the heat radiating through my jeans. I smoothed down his messy, damp hair. "Come on, kid," I told him, keeping my voice soft and steady. "Let's go sit on the hood of the car and get some strawberry ice cream." We walked away into the dark, leaving their fake, crumbling empire behind us. The social fallout hit Amy and Marcus faster than a thrown punch. In the upscale suburbs, reputations are built entirely on appearances, and ruthless gossip is the fastest way to destroy them. By 8 o'clock the very next morning, Eleanor Hughes had formally pulled her son out of Vance Elite striking. By noon, the shaky cell phone video recorded from the bleachers was circulating through every single PTA group chat in the county. The invincible alpha male, the heavy-handed gym king who bullied 12-year-olds to stroke his own ego, was publicly dropped in under 2 minutes by a single mother in a cheap sweater. Within 30 days, Marcus lost more than half of his paying clients. The heavy canvas punching bags hung completely still, gathering dust. The parking lot outside his gym sat entirely empty, baking in the brutal afternoon sun. His ego, his career, and his entire identity were permanently crushed under the weight of an 8-inch punch. Amy suffered a much slower, quieter death. She lost the only currency that ever mattered to her, the admiration of other people. The wealthy suburban mothers she'd spent years kissing up to stopped calling. Her name was quietly scratched off the country club guest lists. The invitations to afternoon iced coffees completely dried up. Without me around to act as her pathetic broke background character, she had no one to stand next to and feel superior. She was left alone in her massive, quiet house with a husband who couldn't even look himself in the mirror anymore. They were stripped of the one thing they valued above, breathing the envious stares of strangers. As for Leo and me, we packed up our cheap apartment, rented a U-Haul, and drove out of state. We settled into a small, quiet town where nobody knows my last name. There are no more suffocating family dinners. No more sitting at the edge of a cold marble table, eating leftover mashed potatoes while swallowing insults disguised as family advice. My kitchen table is cheap wood, but there is no yelling around it. Just the sound of Leo doing his homework and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Amy and Marcus taught me a hard, permanent lesson about the nature of strength. Real power is never loud. It never has to puff out its chest, belittle a child, or tear someone else down just to prove it exists. Real power is entirely silent. The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one making the most noise. Sometimes it is just the quiet woman in the corner doing absolutely everything in her power to avoid the fight. Thank you so much for listening to my story and staying with me until the very end. I wish you all the peace and strength to finally walk away from the toxic tables in your life. Goodbye, and take care of yourselves.